This is the Nikon Z5 II, a camera that, while not perfect, does offer a substantial amount of functionality for the price, and that further demonstrates Nikon's ability to continuously improve and offer a compelling combination of features worthy of praise. Let's get undone.
Gerald Undone. He's crazy.
What's happening, everybody? I'm Gerald Undone, and hexagons are the bestagons. For disclosure, Nikon did lend me this camera to make this review, but it goes back when I'm finished, and they aren't paying me to make this. I did consult with them about some issues I discovered, but that was the end of their input on this production. This video does have an actual sponsor though, and that's Storyblocks. Let's start by giving this camera some context. This is the successor to the Z5 and is very, very similar looking, but it's actually using the Z6 II sensor. But when it comes to feel and ergonomics, you'll be quite comfortable here whether you're coming from a Z6 II or a Z5, because the layout is mostly unchanged. There's no top screen like the Z6 II has, and it doesn't have the remote port of the Z5, and the textures and finishes have been updated a little, but the biggest change is that this body now has a flip screen. And the LCD lag I've complained about in the past is much improved here, and so is the HDMI latency, which is great. And they've changed that HDMI port from the Type-C Mini, but they didn't go full HDMI, they went micro D. This is unfortunate, especially considering the extra space that's seemingly available with the remote port gone. Oh yeah, and the strap triangles are of the jangly variety. Now, because the ergos aren't that different, it means some of the gripes I had with those previous models still exist. For example, I still really dislike this back D-pad thing. It's stiff as hell, it's not a wheel so you can't use it for exposure, and the OK button has very few customization options. They really need just to replace this with the type you'd find on a Sony camera in my opinion. I also wish they'd give you an option to map one of the top dials to ISO without needing to first press the ISO button. As a video shooter, if I can't have 3 dials, I'd rather have an ISO dial than a shutter speed dial. Now, with some lenses, you can map the function ring to control ISO, but that isn't the best solution in all scenarios. I'd rather set that to iris, and then I'd still want the ability to set the thumb dial to ISO. There's also still the issue of having no option to enable a sound to tell you when recording is stopped, and it still has a weird quirk where you can't use zebras and focus peaking at the same time. But there's also a ton of improvements and fixes over the previous generation. So I went back and watched my old reviews to see all the things I complained about then, so I could tell you all the stuff Nikon has fixed with this release. Some of these things have already been seen in other branches of their product line, so this is more directed at a Z5 or Z6 II user. First, they added a linear response option for manual focusing with control over the focus throw, and overall the manual focusing experience is much better than it used to be. HDMI output used to be quite limited, but now you can have both screens on and customize what goes where. You can have your OSD info on both screens, just on one, clean on both, change the resolution, the output range. It's fantastic. The only limitations now are that you can only do 1080p externally while recording RAW internally, and there's no view assist for N-Log over HDMI. You'll have to do that on the monitor you're using instead. There's a new function button on top that you can customize, and that customization is more useful now. For example, when setting white balance, Nikon has had a good custom white balance tool for a while, but previously it was hard to find and activate. Now you can just hold the white balance button of your choosing, and it automatically brings up the reticle to set your custom target. It's great. There's no 30-minute record limit anymore like the previous generation had, and you can record 10-bit N-Log internally up to 4K 60, something you used to need an external recorder for. They've also removed the 1.1 times crop when shooting 10-bit N-Log that I observed on the Z6 II, but the 4K 60 is still a 1.5 times DX crop. So basically, once you get over a couple ergonomic hurdles, which aren't deal breakers by any means, the actual video functionality is greatly improved with far fewer quirks and limitations. Good job, Nikon. I also complained about the autofocus not being very good in low light on the previous generation, but I'm happy to report that I was getting good results down to at least 3 stops under, with some success as low as 4 stops under, but it did start to get a bit unreliable that dark. In this test, for example, the Game Boy is 3 stops under exposed, and the bananas are 4 stops under. You'll notice it struggles a bit at times with bananas, but has very few issues with the Game Boy. It also has the latest and greatest subject tracking, including the auto detection mode so you don't have to switch subject types, and it's very reliable for this kind of talking head. Here, let me demonstrate that so you can see how well it tracks for a talking head scenario at various exposures while I tell you about Storyblocks, the sponsor of today's video, a stock media platform that offers unlimited downloads of diverse and high quality content for one predictable subscription cost. And more importantly, in this age of artificial intelligence, where an increasing volume of what we see online is generated by AI, Storyblocks is committed to providing authentic, stock content created by real artists that AI can't replicate. In fact, their library houses over 1 million HD and 4K video files, images, and motion graphics templates created by those real artists, including a continually expanding inventory of DaVinci Resolve templates that I've come to really appreciate. The platform is incredibly easy to use, and the library is frequently restocked with commissioned content based on customer demand to ensure you'll have access to files that are not only high quality, but fresh and diverse. So to get started with unlimited stock media downloads at one set price, head to storyblocks.com/undone or click the link in the description. So during that sponsor read, we started at neutral exposure and then we went down one stop at a time, all the way down to, I think, 5 stops underexposed, and the performance was great all the way through. So like I said, this generation of Nikon cameras is doing really well for low light autofocusing compared to previous ones. Now we're at 4 stops overexposed, and I do have a tip for self-filming like this though. You want to turn off self-portrait mode in the menu, otherwise you can't use the buttons on the camera when the screen is facing forward. It goes into this different mode when the screen is fully forward facing, and it took me a minute to figure out why the camera wasn't working, so look out for that option in the menu. And just for fun, we are now at ISO 10,000 at f2.8, so we're 5 stops overexposed here in the studio. And yeah, the usefulness of the exposure range for autofocus is quite good. Now let's talk about rolling shutter, which was fun for me to test because I didn't have my strobe when I reviewed the previous generations. So this is the first time I've been able to fully test this sensor, which means I can now provide rolling shutter numbers for the Z6 and Z6 II as well, since they use the same sensor. These numbers will not apply to the original Z5 though, which I believe was using a similar sensor to the original Sony a7 III. So in full frame 4K at 24 frames per second in H.265, I measured 21.5 milliseconds. This isn't fast by any means, but based on my recent video I did demonstrating what different rolling shutter speeds look like, it would seem that this is in the passable zone for many users, and provides similar results to a camera like the Lumix S5 II and 2X. Now if we switch to 4K 60, which uses the 1.5 times crop, the speed increases to 14.5 milliseconds, which is where we start to enter into the good result territory and fast enough for most applications. Now you can also record using NRAW on this camera, but you'll find that the results are identical at 21.5 and 14.5 milliseconds depending on whether you choose the FX or DX modes. However, this also reveals the first problem with the internal RAW recording on this camera. How can the raw image only be 4K from a 6K sensor, but not have any read speed benefits? Let's look at the dynamic range results next to figure this out. Okay, so let's start here with 4K 24. This is full frame, H.265, ISO 800, which is the base ISO for N-Log on this camera. Over here, you'll see slope-based DR. That's how many stops total that we were able to detect using the Xali-21 and Imatest. And then we also like to look at the 0.5 medium score, which is a signal noise ratio of 2 to tell us how many of those stops are good, clean, quality stops. These numbers are too good. 14.2, that's reasonable. 14 stops, sure. But 13.8 of those 14 stops should not be signal noise ratio of 2. This generally means that the noise reduction is way overtuned, and it is, and we're going to look at that in a minute. This camera seems to have a cleanup point, second native ISO, whatever you want to call it, of around 6400. So if we look at ISO 5000, we're at 13.2 with 11.1 on the medium, and if we switch to 6400, we go back to 14.2 detected with a 12.3 clean stops. And speaking of that ISO range, I did find it incredibly consistent for color and visual quality for the most part when you move from 800 all the way up. You can go as high as 51,200, which is considerably noisy, but the color is maintained really well. There's not much in the way of shifts, which we don't normally see, so that's quite impressive. In a 4K 60, which has the DX 1.5 times crop, we're still getting pretty much 14 stops and a 12.7 on medium, which again is, we're getting there with noise reduction. Or it could be compression. It could be a combination of H.265 compression and noise reduction. But as we move over to the RAW, which has fewer stops, only 13.6, but somehow both the low and the medium are also 13.6. So this is saying that every stop that it can detect is acceptably clean. And if anything, RAW should be even noisier and should present a worst case scenario where you have to clean it up with noise reduction. But that's not the case with this RAW. Also, if you look down here at our noise graphs below, this is out of whack. It should look something a little bit more like this, where the color channels kind of line up. But on this one, it looks weird. The blue is in a different position. I tried running the test again, and again, 13, 13, 13 is the same result all the way down. And then I tried converting it to Vlog when I developed it, and I still got the same result. You shouldn't have the top 3 numbers all be the same. If we go to DX NRAW, which is the crop version, we actually get a normal result, which tells me that in the DX version, it's just windowing into the frame and nothing weird is going on. But in the full frame version, as I mentioned in rolling shutter, why is it reading out at the same speed? This here is the 4K, presumably oversampled from 6K, H.265 10-bit N-Log file. And you can see the individual pixels and how they're, shaped. And then if we switch over to the NRAW, you can see that you lose information. You see this kind of streaking and crosshatch pattern. This is usually what happens when you throw away lines, which makes sense because we're not getting that 6K RAW. So something has to be happening to go from 6K to 4K. The weird part, like I said, is why aren't we getting a read speed benefit? And I think it's because they're doing this. They've already sort of processed this image, and then they're throwing away information and then packing it into RAW. You do get the RAW panel, which you can see down over here, which is nice. They have lens distortion and color temperature and vignette control and stuff like that, and that's all good. So it's reading out at 21.5. You're getting the same image as the H.265, but then they're line skipping it and packing it into a RAW container, so to speak. So it's like pseudo RAW, and the image quality is actually worse. Now, that isn't to say that there's no difference in the noise. If we go to the RAW, yes, it's far more noisy, which gives the indication that it's less processed. But you see how these lines along the top here, they should be sharp and noisy. They look like they're already compressed and then noise is allowed through. It's a very strange phenomenon. If I switch back and forth here, the H.265 one is actually kind of sharper because it's the 6K oversample, but like heavy compression and noise reduction. And then the RAW one is a worse image because of that weird throwing away information, but more noise is allowed through. And you end up with kind of damned if you do, damned if you don't approach to it. So what I like to do when I get a crazy good result, like 13.8 stops, and I think that shouldn't be the case, is I'll compare it to a known entity. And in this case, this shot here, if I turn off the grade, you can see I brightly exposed the right side of the frame and then flagged it off and then put the other color chart in a dark environment and shot them both at the same time. And then we can kind of push and pull them with masks. And this is the Nikon Z5 II. And then I compared it to the Sony Alpha 1, which I know what that one looks like with its noise reduction and how many stops and stuff. So if this camera really was like a stop better than the Sony Alpha 1, we'd be able to see that here. But if we zoom in over to this side where we had to recover those shadows and we look at the Sony Alpha 1 and then flick over to the Nikon Z5 II, you can see that there's way more noise and just way more just artifacts and color blotches. And we play a little bit of it. That's what it looks like. And then play a little bit on the Sony. Much cleaner, much finer noise. And if you take a really close look, say at this middle gray and compare the two, and if we look at the recovery of this part here, both did pretty well. This bright chip that was overexposed didn't recover quite as well as it did on the Alpha 1. And the gradation here is better on the Alpha 1 than it is on this one. Let's take a quick look at color and also comparing the H.265 version to the RAW version. So this one here is the H.265 N-Log 10-bit, looks like that. And this is what it looks like with a LUT applied, which we're going to talk LUTs in a minute because there's been some changes there. And if we compare it to the RAW, similar, but there are some differences. We were able to observe those back when we were looking at the chroma subsampling. If we flick back and forth here, you can see that the blue channel along the bottom is expressed differently. It's subtle, but it's there. Just a little bit difference in sort of like the hue luma between the colors. The RAW is a little bit warmer, a little bit more saturated in the orange. There's a new technical LUT for the Nikon cameras. I believe they've unified all the cameras, whether it's Z8, Z9, the Z5 II, Z6 III, where instead of having different LUTs for each camera and they're on different versions, there's now just one LUT. And I believe it was with their collaboration with Red. I had complained in the past that there's no perfect LUT for Nikon. Originally, this is what the Z9 version 1 LUT did. I thought, exposure-wise, it's pretty good, but I always felt that the gradations here were a little bit harsh. Then when the Z8 came out, they had sort of a version 1 for the Z8, which was also version 2 for the Z9. They were the same, and it looks like this. And it definitely fixed the gradations, but it kind of increased the exposure of your image when you applied it, which caused an issue when using the view assist on the camera, because you would expose based on the back of the screen, and then you'd pop the LUT on in post, and it would be brighter than you expected. So now we have the new technical LUT. This is the one they developed together with Red. It now matches the view assist on the Z5 II, which is great, which means that whatever you see on the back of the screen is what you're going to get when you apply this LUT. And the gradations are still quite nice. In fact, there's a bit of a roll-off, which can make sort of a pleasing look. However, compared to their previous version, like say this one, the saturation is a bit lacking and the color accuracy is worse. If we look over here in the vector scope, you can see that the color accuracy was pretty good on the previous LUT, but now with the new LUT they did with red, the color accuracy isn't quite as good anymore, and it's definitely desaturated in certain places. So then I decided, well, heck, since we've got a really good, foundation now, maybe I can just use my color charts to fix it. It's very subtle. I'll go back and forth so you can see. Look at the color chart. That's the red LUT, the new red technical LUT, and this is the change. All I did was fix the luminance of certain colors and saturations. So I think I'm going to make this available for download. But then I took it one step further. A lot of the LUTs you get from manufacturers, whether it's for Sony, Nikon, whatever, they don't go as bright as they should. Like they keep the sort of highlights kind of a little bit pushed down and rolled off. They don't go full, 709 broadcast. Like these whites don't hit 90% IRE and stuff like that. And that's good because with a working LUT, you probably want the ability to preserve highlights and then manipulate them how you want in post. But sometimes I just want a quick LUT that I can throw on and say, look, done. Image is done. So what I did is I made another LUT that just goes like this. It's the same one where I fixed the color, but as you can see on the waveform here, I let the highlights rise to where they should be, and you just get sort of a finished look right out the gate with one step. So before and after. And this will be great for any Nikon shooter, whether it's for this camera, Z8, Z9, Z6 III. You can get these LUTs, and they should work for those cameras as well. And I'm also going to make the same things for Sony. And the best part is, if you get my Nikon and my Sony LUT and you shoot them on two different cameras, the image should match because I've corrected all the different hues and luminances. And all the sample footage that I used throughout this video was using that one and done LUT. You can see this one here from the vlog. Off, on. Just basically completely finishes the image. Here's another example. You can just drop this on, and if you found that you overexpose the image a little bit, then you can just bring the exposure down a little bit with offset on a previous node, and it should still look good. Another example here, just drop the one-step LUT on, and then adjust your exposure, and then you just get a finished look immediately like that. And the best part about these LUTs is that they work indoors and outdoors, because you know me, I shoot in a studio all the time, and what I found often is that when you buy LUTs, like creative LUTs, it's like, those LUTs will work really good for this person who likes to shoot in the jungle a lot, in the desert a lot, but then you take it in your studio and everything's out of whack. Anyway, I'm done talking about the LUTs. Let's move on to the next thing. Stabilization on this camera is decent. When it comes to video, Nikon has never really had class-leading stabilization, and that's still the case here. This might be one of their best versions yet, though. It's reasonably well balanced between mitigating distracting distortions while providing a noticeable amount of stability. There's also an electronic VR mode that increases the stabilization at the cost of a crop, but I wouldn't recommend this mode for shots with a lot of vertical movement, as you'll end up getting that weird effect where you have motion blur from the movement, but the frame itself doesn't move, so it just looks weird. I'd save that mode for more of a human tripod use case. I got a little vlog test here for you to test a whole bunch of things really, but see how the stabilization and rolling shutter looks in combination while walking around. Right now the stabilization is just turned on normal mode. I do not have electronic VR on, so this is just normal base IBIS. I'm also using the microphone built into the camera, no shotgun mic on top, because I was finding it actually sounded pretty good, so I wanted to see how it sounds in a practical demonstration. A little bit different, but we'll see how it... Okay, so I went back and listened to it, and I found that the wind noise was actually quite problematic at a lot of points. Although I did think the clarity was pretty decent, and it was just on auto gain, and I thought that it was doing well with the audio levels as well. So now I'm doing it again, but I have the wind noise attenuator or whatever turned on in the camera to see if it makes a difference. There's a lot of wind right now, so I wanted to check the internal mic again to see how the wind noise removal works, see if it sounds any better. Still blowing. Now I'm using the on-camera shotgun mic, the Rode VideoMic NTG. I'm in auto ISO and I have a 9-stop ND on. Sometimes I do find though that it kind of cranks the ISO up in places that I wouldn't. So the metering isn't always perfect, but it seems pretty good most of the time. It definitely seems to have a face priority, but maybe tends to overexpose the face just a pinch when you're in this sort of, like there's no cloud in the sky, it's like midday harsh sun. But looking at it on the side of the screen, I think it's doing pretty well. Also, the screen is quite bright, or rather you can make it quite bright. Again, it's full sun here, normally it would be hard to see, and it's very easy to see. Nice and clear, it's a good screen. I'm shooting in N-Log with the 4K 24 FX full frame mode, so that's the 22 millisecond rolling shutter mode. Battery life on this camera was solid for me. It's still using the EN-EL15 in the C variety, And in 4K 24, I would get just over 2 hours of record time on a full charge. This camera still has the peculiar 2 hour and 5 minute record limit though that we've seen on other recent Nikons. I've never gotten an answer on why that is, but I suppose it doesn't matter if the battery is going to die around the same time anyway. You can use USB-C power delivery on this camera and extend your battery life indefinitely, but you'll still have to press record again after 2 hours and 5 minutes, so that might be a problem if you're using this to shoot your podcast or something similar. In 4K 60, I recorded for just over 90 minutes on a full charge and didn't experience any overheating in my 22 Celsius 72 Fahrenheit studio. But that was with setting the auto temperature cutout setting to high, something that may not have been available on earlier generations. So keep an eye out for that in the menu. So that's all good. But it was during these tests that I noticed a major issue with this camera that I've already reported to Nikon. It doesn't seem to be calculating the time remaining correctly. This problem is a little bit hard to explain, so bear with me. When you put a card into this camera, oh, by the way, this camera uses 2 SD cards instead of 1 CF and 1 SD, but you still can't do redundant recording in video, only in photo. Anyway, when you put a fresh SD card in, it calculates how much time you have remaining and displays it on the top corner of the screen. It does this based on recording mode and frame rate. So for example, in 4K 24 H.265 10-bit, a 128 gig card will display 1 hour and 12 minutes. But this isn't right. At the 100 megabit per second bit rate that it seems to target, we should be getting more like 2.5 hours. And this is proven because after you record for the calculated 1 hour and 12 minutes, your recording stops, but then the space remaining is recalculated and magically you have more space on the card again, but it keeps halving itself. So they'll let you record for an hour, the recording will stop, recalculate, then say you have 30 minutes remaining. If you record again, it'll run for those 30 minutes, then stop, recalculate, and say you have 15 minutes left, and so on, until you eventually get to that 2 hours and 30 minutes you should have had from the get-go. My guess as to why this is happening is because of improper application of variable bitrate prediction, because this isn't an issue in the NRAW modes, which use a constant bitrate. That calculation is just done once, and it's correct. I understand the draw of variable bitrate when using H.265, but I think for video recording, it's a mistake. Shooters want predictability and reliability. They want to know that if their card is worth 2 hours of shooting, and if they get a card twice the size, they'll get twice the record time. It should be easy to predict and calculate, and it should be repeatable. If Nikon wants to use 100 megabits per second as a target, then just set the bitrate to 100 megabits per second constant and calculate time remaining based on that. Because in its current state, it's arbitrarily cutting your record time in half and forcing you to start recording again for no logical reason. Again, I've reported this to Nikon, but at the time of shooting this video, I don't have any updates to provide about this issue. And that's all I have to say about this camera for now. Despite my complaints, I still think it's very capable, and it's made even more compelling by its price tag of just $1,700 US. And Nikon has been pretty solid with firmware updates in the past, and I feel like most of the issues I have with this camera could be solved with firmware. And I think that if they manage to do that, it'll be one of the best options available at that price point. But even in its current state, it's still a pretty solid option, and as I said in the intro, I'm happy to see that Nikon is continuing to improve and provide new features for their user base to enjoy. Yeah, all right. I'm done.